Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan walked into the small, dusty pawn shop on the outskirts of Charlotte, a place where time seemed to stand still. The shelves were crowded with everything from old televisions to mismatched silverware, but there was something about the cluttered shop that caught his attention. It wasn't the shiny objects or the trinkets stacked haphazardly in boxes. It was the feeling of forgotten memories, the sense that buried treasures might be waiting for discovery. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered, the smell of aged leather and old books greeting him. The shop was quiet, save for the faint hum of an old ceiling fan that barely stirred the air. Bill, the elderly shopkeeper, looked up from his counter and raised an eyebrow. At first glance, he didn't recognize the man standing before him, but he could tell by the way he moved that this wasn't just another random customer. "Can I help you with something, son?" Bill asked, his voice raspy but friendly. Michael smiled, a simple nod. "Just browsing," he replied, his voice carrying the familiarity of someone who had spent years in public spaces, used to being recognized, but also comfortable in his anonymity when he chose it. Bill, used to his regular customers, didn't ask any more questions. He gestured toward a shelf cluttered with sports memorabilia. "Got some old jerseys and signed balls back there. Maybe you'll find something interesting," he said. Michael's interest piqued. Sports memorabilia, he had seen it all over the years, but there was something about being in a place like this, far from the glitz of auctions and celebrity collectors, that made it feel different. Perhaps it was the randomness of it, the fact that it wasn't curated for the elite. Maybe it was just the fact that he felt like he could slip away from his legendary status, if only for a moment, and not be noticed. As he wandered the aisles of the store, Michael's fingers brushed over various items: old baseball cards, a vintage basketball hoop from the 1970s, worn jerseys of players long retired. None of it seemed to hold his attention for long, until he came across a dusty, unmarked box sitting at the back of a shelf. It was partially hidden behind a stack of tattered magazines. Curious, Michael pulled it out, dusting off the top. He opened it carefully, expecting more faded baseball cards or football jerseys. Instead, his eyes landed on something far more personal: a photograph. The image was yellowed with age, but the subject was unmistakable. It was a young Michael Jordan, caught in the air, mid-dunk. The image wasn't one of the well-known highlights from his legendary career. No, this was from his college days. The 1982 NCAA championship game where he hit the game-winning shot for the University of North Carolina. Michael's breath caught in his chest as he stared at the photo. This was a piece of history, a moment that had nearly slipped through the cracks of time. The picture wasn't framed in a fancy display. It wasn't part of any collection. It was just a forgotten snapshot buried among the clutter in a pawn shop. Bill watched from a distance, sensing the shift in Michael's demeanor as he studied the photo. "That yours?" he asked, curiosity piqued. Michael didn't respond immediately. He turned the photo over in his hands, the weight of it sinking in. He hadn't seen this photo in years, not since the days when he was just a college player dreaming of greatness. The fact that it had ended up here, in a pawn shop, was a surreal twist of fate. It wasn't just a picture, it was a reminder of a time when he wasn't yet Michael Jordan, the basketball legend. The image took him back to his days at UNC, to the weight of expectations that had followed him since he was just a kid in Wilmington, North Carolina. The pressure to be the best was immense, but it was during those early years that he had learned what it took to fight through adversity. This photo was from the moment that solidified his place in basketball history, the moment he had made that shot against Georgetown, forever etching his name in the annals of NCAA history. For a brief moment, Michael felt that pang of nostalgia, mixed with a sense of gratitude. That championship win had been a turning point in his life, but it had also marked the beginning of a journey filled with doubts, obstacles, and the constant pressure to prove himself. He had been just a college player, trying to find his footing. And while he had succeeded on the court, the years that followed had been filled with moments when he had questioned whether he was truly cut out for greatness. He had nearly quit basketball after his high school failure, after being cut from the varsity team. At that time, basketball had seemed like an impossible dream. But then came UNC, then came that shot. That shot had led him to the NBA, and the rest, as they say, was history. He realized that what he held in his hands wasn't just a photograph, it was a symbol of his journey. It was a reminder that greatness wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't even about the trophies, the championships, or the millions of fans who would cheer for him later. It was about those early moments, the struggle, the doubt, the belief that maybe, just maybe, he could make something of himself. Bill saw Michael's connection to the photograph, the way his eyes softened as he stared at it. "You okay there?" Bill asked, noticing the shift in the atmosphere. Michael nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Just didn't expect to see this here. It's something I thought I'd lost." He handed the photo back to Bill. "How much for this?" he asked, a glint of determination in his eyes. Bill didn't even have to think about it. "I'll give it to you for nothing. If it means something to you, it's yours." Michael's eyes widened slightly. He wasn't used to such generosity, not with something as valuable as this. "Are you sure?" he asked, not wanting to take advantage of the situation. Bill waved it off. "It's just a photo, son. But to you, it's part of a legacy. You've earned it." Michael looked at the photo one last time, his mind racing with memories. This wasn't just a simple exchange, it was a full-circle moment. He left the pawn shop with a piece of his past in hand, a past that had shaped him into the player and the person he was today. As he walked out of the shop, the bell above the door jingling once again, Michael paused for a moment, the photo tucked safely in his jacket. He realized that sometimes, the greatest treasures weren't the ones that could be bought or sold. They were the moments that defined us, the memories that shaped us, and the experiences that guided us through the trials of life. For Michael Jordan, this unexpected trip to a dusty pawn shop had brought him face to face with the very essence of his journey, one that had begun with a single shot and would ultimately change the game forever. Michael Jordan sat in his car for a few moments after leaving the pawn shop, the photo still clutched tightly in his hand. It was strange how something so small could carry so much weight. The memory of that time in his life, the uncertainty, the self-doubt, it all came flooding back. But as he looked at the photo of himself mid-dunk in the 1982 NCAA championship game, a small smile crept onto his face. That shot had changed everything for him. It had changed the course of his life and his career. He was no longer just a college player with potential. He was someone who had the opportunity to make something of himself. But the road to get to that moment hadn't been easy. Michael had faced many obstacles, both on and off the court. Growing up in Wilmington, North Carolina, basketball had always been his dream. But it wasn't just the game itself that drove him, it was the challenge of proving everyone wrong. In high school, he was cut from the varsity team. He wasn't tall enough, fast enough, or skilled enough, at least in the eyes of his coach. That failure was a defining moment for Michael. It was the first time he truly considered quitting basketball. He could still remember the sting of rejection. The feeling of being dismissed, of not measuring up to the standards set for him. He had been crushed. His world had revolved around basketball, and yet here he was, with his dreams seemingly slipping away. But something in him refused to let go. Instead of quitting, he went back to work, pushing himself harder than ever before. He joined the junior varsity team and poured every ounce of energy he had into improving. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when he doubted whether it would ever pay off. But he didn't stop. The photo in his hand brought him back to those days. It was a reminder of the journey he had taken, the countless hours spent in the gym, the doubts he had fought, and the determination that had driven him to become who he was. The shot in that game had been more than just a game winner, it had been a statement. It was the moment he realized he belonged, not just in college basketball, but in the larger conversation about who could make it in the NBA. That shot had opened doors, but the work didn't stop there. Even as a freshman at UNC, Michael had to prove himself. There was no guarantee of success, no promise that he would be the star. He was surrounded by incredible talent, including players like James Worthy and Sam Perkins. The competition was fierce, and the expectations were high. But Michael was used to that by now. He knew what it meant to fight for his place, to earn everything he got. His relationship with Coach Dean Smith wasn't always easy. Smith was known for his disciplined approach, and Michael was sometimes frustrated with the restrictions placed on his play. He wanted to break free, to show the world what he could do, but Smith knew that there was more to the game than individual brilliance. That freshman year at UNC was a turning point. Michael learned how to adapt to a system, how to fit into a team. He learned the importance of defense, of teamwork, of playing the long game. And when the 1982 NCAA championship game came around, he was ready. That final shot, the one that won the game for UNC, was a moment he would never forget. It wasn't just the victory that meant something, it was the realization that he could handle the pressure, that he could rise to the occasion when it mattered most. He was no longer the kid who had been cut from his high school team. He was a champion. As Michael sat in the car, the memories swirled in his mind. That photo, now in his possession once again, felt like a bridge between his past and present. It was a reminder of how far he had come, but also of the struggles he had faced along the way. In many ways, the journey had only just begun. The game had been good to him, but the challenges kept coming. He wasn't just playing for championships anymore. He was playing to prove that he could maintain greatness, year after year, season after season. The expectations had only grown, and with it, the pressure. Back in Chicago, his return to the NBA in 1995 after his first retirement had been nothing short of extraordinary. He came back to the league not as a young prodigy but as a seasoned veteran with a championship pedigree. His first few games back were a statement. He was still Michael Jordan, the player who could dominate the league, and he hadn't lost his edge. But that first comeback was just the start of a new chapter. It was the beginning of a second three-peat, a journey that would see the Bulls solidify their place as one of the most dominant teams in NBA history. But even as he achieved more success, the pressure of maintaining that level of excellence weighed heavily on him. The doubts, the fears, the thoughts of retirement, all of it swirled in his mind. The weight of living up to the legacy of his past while still wanting to prove himself again and again was a battle he fought every day. At times, it felt like the game was more demanding than ever before. But it was in those moments of doubt that he found his true strength. It was in the struggle, in the fight to overcome adversity, that he found the will to push forward. That was the essence of Michael Jordan, the relentless pursuit of greatness, even in the face of setbacks and challenges. It wasn't enough to win one championship or to have one great season. He was always pushing for more, always striving to be better, to prove that he could continue to be the best. As he got out of the car and walked back into his house, Michael glanced at the photo again, now tucked safely into his bag. It wasn't just a piece of memorabilia. It was a symbol of his journey, of the doubt he had faced, the failures he had overcome, and the victories that had shaped him. It was a reminder of the man he had become, not just as a player, but as a person who understood that greatness was earned through hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. He placed the photo on his desk, a quiet acknowledgement of how far he had come. It was funny how a simple item, buried in a pawn shop and forgotten for years, could bring everything rushing back, the moments of doubt, the moments of triumph, the lessons learned along the way. As he sat back in his chair, Michael Jordan couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. The journey had been long, but it had been worth every step. And now, with that photo as a constant reminder, he could reflect on his legacy, a legacy built not just on championships and accolades, but on the lessons that had shaped him into the man he was today. It was a legacy that would live on, not just in the game, but in the hearts and minds of those who had followed his journey from the very beginning. Michael Jordan had come full circle, and he was at peace with the path he had walked. Michael Jordan sat back in his chair, his eyes still lingering on the photo he had just reclaimed from the pawn shop. The faded image of a younger version of himself, frozen in time as he soared through the air, almost seemed to hum with significance. For a moment, it felt like he had just walked into that moment again, the 1982 NCAA championship game, the weight of the entire season resting on his shoulders, the uncertainty, the excitement, the belief in himself, and the overwhelming sense of possibility. It was a defining moment in his life and career, one he hadn't thought about in years. Yet, here it was again, bringing everything back. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, the photo still in his hands, and let his thoughts drift. That photo, more than just an image of a game-winning shot, had become a symbol of something deeper. A reminder of the journey, of the lows as much as the highs. It was a window into the moments of doubt that shaped him, the times when he had been unsure whether he was good enough, whether he would ever truly belong in the company of the best players in the world. As a teenager, Jordan had faced challenges that would have stopped most athletes in their tracks. Growing up in Wilmington, North Carolina, he had been a promising young player, but not the most physically gifted. And yet, his hunger to prove himself, to not just be good, but to be great, drove him to work harder than anyone else. But when he didn't make the varsity team in high school as a sophomore, the sting of rejection hit harder than anything he had experienced before. The defeat nearly broke him. He had considered giving up on basketball altogether. But something deep inside him wouldn't let him quit. It wasn't just about basketball, it was about proving to himself that he could overcome anything, that he could rise above the doubts others had placed on him. It wasn't until he dedicated himself fully to the game, going back to practice day after day, refining his skills and pushing through the pain, that he found his true strength. That photo, from his time at the University of North Carolina, was the beginning of it all. The 1982 NCAA championship game had been pivotal not only in terms of winning but in shaping the man Michael Jordan would become. That shot, the one that won the game, was a culmination of everything he had worked for, but it was also just the start of a much bigger journey. The feeling of victory on that court had been sweet, but it was the lessons learned in those moments of doubt, the perseverance, the ability to fight through the challenges, that stayed with him. When he entered the NBA, he knew it wasn't going to be easy. He was a rookie in a league full of seasoned veterans, and even though he was widely regarded as one of the best players to come out of college in years, he still had a lot to prove. The NBA was a different beast, and he quickly realized that his raw talent wouldn't be enough. The competition was fierce, and the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. It wasn't long before Michael's innate desire to push himself and prove everyone wrong kicked into high gear. He wasn't satisfied with just being good. He wanted to be the best. And yet, even as he dominated games, even as his talents became undeniable, there was always something that gnawed at him. Despite his growing success, despite the accolades and praise, there was always that question in the back of his mind: was it enough? Was he truly as great as everyone claimed, or was it all just the result of a few lucky breaks and a great team around him? Those early years in the NBA, before the Chicago Bulls truly became a championship-caliber team, were filled with uncertainty. Michael led the Bulls in scoring every season, but they couldn't get over the hump. Every time they were close to a championship, it seemed like another team would step up to knock them down. The Boston Celtics, led by Larry Bird, were always in the way, as were the Detroit Pistons, with their aggressive and physical play. It wasn't just the team's success that haunted Michael, it was his own inability to carry the weight of the expectations. The media, the fans, everyone had their eyes on him. They expected him to bring a championship to Chicago, and every loss, every setback, felt like a personal failure. By the late 1980s, Michael had become a household name, but the pressure weighed heavily on him. He wasn't just trying to be the best player in the league, he was trying to live up to the narrative of the greatest. And yet, despite all his individual success, the team still couldn't make it past the Celtics or the Pistons. Michael's frustration boiled over, but that frustration became fuel. He began to work harder, focusing not just on his scoring but on becoming a better overall player, on defense, on passing, on leadership. And then came the moment when everything shifted, the moment that would define his career. In 1991, after years of playoff disappointment, the Bulls finally broke through. They defeated the Detroit Pistons, and with that victory, Michael Jordan finally had his chance at the ultimate prize, an NBA championship. The 1991 Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers was a defining moment, not just for Michael but for the entire Chicago Bulls organization. It was the moment when all the sacrifices, all the doubts, all the hard work finally paid off. The Bulls swept the Lakers, and Michael was named Finals MVP. But what made that championship so special wasn't just the title itself, it was the culmination of everything he had fought for. He had gone from the kid who had been cut from his high school team to the best player in the world. He had transformed from a raw talent into a complete player, capable of dominating every aspect of the game. And yet, as he stood there with the trophy in his hands, there was something in his eyes that spoke of more than just joy. There was a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had taken him from the depths of failure to the pinnacle of success. Michael's victory in 1991 was the beginning of something even bigger. Over the next few years, the Bulls would go on to win 2 more championships, completing their first three-peat. But those early years were the foundation of his legacy. The way he fought through doubt, the way he turned frustration into motivation, the way he kept pushing himself to be better, those were the qualities that would define his career. But as Michael sat back in his chair, holding that photo, he realized that the journey had never truly ended. Yes, he had won championships, MVPs, and accolades, but the fight, the internal battle to be better, to prove himself every day, never stopped. It wasn't just about the victories, it was about the pursuit of greatness, the constant desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. That's what had made him the legend he was. That photo, which had been buried in a dusty pawn shop, wasn't just a memento of a game-winning shot. It was a reminder of everything he had overcome, everything he had achieved, and everything that had shaped him into the man who stood before the world as Michael Jordan. It wasn't the fame or the championships that defined him, it was the journey, the struggles, and the relentless pursuit of something greater. And as he placed the photo back in his drawer, Michael knew that his legacy would live on, not just in the trophies, but in the story of how he became the greatest basketball player of all time. The photo sat on the desk, a silent testament to the path Michael Jordan had walked. He found himself drawn to it more than he expected. Not because it was a rare or valuable artifact, but because it was a piece of a time when he had to believe in himself despite all the voices around him saying otherwise. That moment at UNC, with the game-winning shot against Georgetown, had been more than just a pivotal point in a championship, it had been a personal breakthrough. Sitting there, Michael found himself reflecting on the years before the fame, before the millions of fans chanting his name, before the championships and the banners. He thought back to the early days of his journey, when it wasn't clear he would make it at all. As much as his college years were defining, the road to becoming Michael Jordan, the legend, had been marked with challenges, failures, and doubts. It wasn't something anyone saw when they watched him soar through the air for a dunk or hit a clutch shot at the buzzer. No, the public's perception of him was always filtered through the lens of greatness. But the real story wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. It was easy to forget that he wasn't an overnight success. People rarely spoke of the early struggles, of being told he wasn't tall enough, or strong enough, or skilled enough. Of being overlooked by high school coaches, or barely getting minutes in the early seasons of his NBA career. Those moments shaped him just as much as the victories did. They carved the path, each setback laying a brick for the success to come. His mind wandered to his time at UNC, the pressure of being heralded as the next big thing. That pressure wasn't something he could escape, even as he tried to block it out with determination and hard work. It was the sense that his every move was being scrutinized. Being told that he had to live up to the expectations of not only his coaches but of the entire basketball world. It didn't help that there was no clear path forward. Even at the college level, success wasn't guaranteed. He might have won the NCAA title, but he still wasn't guaranteed a spot in the NBA. Every day, every practice, felt like a test he had to pass just to move on. When he made that game-winning shot against Georgetown, it was a moment of validation, but it also reinforced his biggest fear, that greatness was fleeting, and that he would have to constantly prove himself to stay there. Those early years in Chicago, once he was drafted to the Bulls, were no different. The team wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, and despite Michael's talent, they weren't winning championships. The early seasons were a testament to how hard it was to succeed when the team wasn't built to complement his game. He had to fight through that. The frustration was real. The Bulls weren't just getting beaten, they were getting humiliated by teams like the Boston Celtics, whose talent was too much for them. Even after Michael became an all-star, even after he was considered one of the best players in the league, the team around him wasn't good enough. It wasn't just about individual success anymore. It wasn't enough to be an incredible scorer, to hit game-winning shots, or to dominate the floor. Michael had to think bigger. He had to learn what it took to become a champion, not just a great player. And that journey wasn't as smooth as it appeared on the court. Off the court, there was doubt. Was he doing enough to elevate his teammates? Could he be the leader the Bulls needed to get over the hump? The biggest test came with the Detroit Pistons, a team built on physicality, grit, and a no-holds-barred style of play that seemed designed to break him. They were everything Michael wasn't: tough, relentless, and unapologetically aggressive. They beat the Bulls year after year, and with each loss, the weight of failure hung over Michael like a shadow. Each time he was knocked out of the playoffs by the Pistons, the questions about his ability to lead a team to a championship got louder. The pressure was mounting. There were times when it felt like his body wasn't keeping up with the demands he was placing on it. Injuries started to take their toll, especially with the way he played, unrelenting, fearless, constantly attacking the rim. He had been known for his athleticism, but it wasn't just about his natural talent. It was his mindset. Every injury felt like another setback, but he always came back. And when the Pistons knocked the Bulls out yet again in 1990, it wasn't just a loss, it was a sign that he needed to change his approach if he was ever going to reach the mountaintop. And so, he did. Michael transformed his game. He became stronger, faster, smarter. He didn't just rely on his athleticism, he refined his skills. He worked on his defense, on being a more complete player, and learned to use his teammates. He knew that if the Bulls were going to beat the Pistons, it wasn't going to be with raw individual talent alone. He had to become more than just the best scorer in the league. He had to be a leader, a player who could elevate everyone around him. When the Bulls finally defeated the Pistons in 1991, it was a moment of redemption. It was everything he had worked for, everything that had been expected of him, and everything he had sacrificed. But it wasn't just about the victory. It was the way he won. He didn't just score the most points, he didn't just make the biggest plays. He led his team in ways he never had before, and in doing so, he helped the Bulls break through. The mental game had been the key all along. It wasn't just about pushing through adversity, it was about learning how to manage it, how to use it to fuel your success. That was the moment everything changed. The Bulls' first championship in 1991 was the culmination of everything Michael had fought for. It was the reward for all the years of struggles, of failures, and of self-doubt. He had not just won a title, but he had overcome the very obstacles that had once threatened to derail his career. But even then, he knew this victory wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. After the 1991 finals, Michael's confidence skyrocketed. The constant fight for validation was behind him, replaced by a newfound understanding of his place in the game. Yet, even with that championship ring on his finger, Michael wasn't content. He knew that the next challenge was just around the corner, and with it came the need to continue growing, to continue pushing, to continue elevating his game. As he sat there, reflecting on his journey, Michael realized that he was never really satisfied, not in the way people thought. It wasn't about the trophies or the accolades, it was about the process, the growth, and the constant drive to improve. Looking at the photo in front of him, he understood something he hadn't fully realized before. Greatness wasn't a destination, it was a journey that required constant effort, and he was only getting started. The photo wasn't just a reminder of his past, it was a blueprint for his future. And as he left his office that day, the weight of the memories and the lessons they carried would stay with him as he continued to navigate the world of basketball, not just as a player, but as a symbol of what it meant to overcome the odds. The sound of the basketball bouncing echoed through the empty gym as Michael Jordan sat on the sideline, his legs stretched out in front of him. The smell of the polished wood floor, the faint hum of the overhead lights, everything in this space felt familiar. It was a place he had spent countless hours, both as a young man learning the game and as a legend cementing his legacy. Now, years after he'd retired, he still came back to places like this when he needed to reflect. The gym, the game, the memories, it was all tied together. Michael looked at the photo in his hands again, the image of a young him from the 1982 NCAA championship game, that shot against Georgetown that had changed his life. It had been just a moment in time, but it held so much more. It wasn't just a game-winning shot, it was a symbol of everything he had fought for, everything he had overcome. The struggles in high school, being cut from the varsity team, the doubts that followed him in those early years, this moment was a turning point, but it wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning. He had come so far from that uncertain young player. When he first entered the NBA, things weren't easy. Despite his undeniable talent, the team he joined wasn't ready for a championship run. The Bulls were still rebuilding, and Michael was often the lone star in a sea of mediocrity. It was a lonely place to be, to carry the weight of a franchise on your shoulders, knowing that no matter how well you played, you couldn't make up for the lack of support around you. The losses piled up, and with each one, the questions about his ability to lead a team to greatness grew louder. Could he really carry the Bulls to a title? Could he be the leader everyone hoped he would be? But Michael wasn't one to back down from a challenge. In fact, the doubt only fueled him more. He had been doubted his entire career, from high school to college, and now, even in the pros, people were still questioning his ability to win. It wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving something to himself. The journey to greatness wasn't about one moment of glory, it was about the relentless pursuit of something more, something beyond just individual accolades. It was about leadership, about growing as a player and a person, and about pushing yourself to a level that nobody thought possible. The turning point came in 1991. The Chicago Bulls had finally broken through the playoff barrier, but the true test was yet to come, the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons had been the obstacle standing in Michael's way for years. Their physical style of play, their refusal to back down from anyone, had kept the Bulls from making it to the finals. Each year, it felt like they were getting closer, but each year, they fell short. For Michael, it felt like his entire career was on the line. If he couldn't get past the Pistons, how could he ever be considered one of the greats? But the challenge pushed him to evolve. He became stronger, more resilient. He worked on his game, not just as a scorer, but as a leader. He learned how to make his teammates better. And when the time came, he didn't back down. The Bulls finally defeated the Pistons in 1991, and with that victory, they punched their ticket to the NBA Finals. But it wasn't just the win that mattered, it was how they did it. Michael had elevated his game, and the entire team had followed suit. They weren't just a collection of players anymore. They were a team with a shared purpose, a shared belief in their ability to win. The 1991 Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers was a moment of redemption. It was Michael's first championship, the culmination of everything he had worked for, everything he had overcome. But even in that moment of victory, he knew it wasn't the end of the story. It was just another step in his journey. Winning the first title was a validation of his belief in himself, but it didn't quiet the doubts completely. The expectations only grew after that. Michael had always known that the game was about more than just talent. It was about mentality. The best players didn't just rely on their skills, they embraced the grind, the work that had to be done when no one was watching. The grind had been Michael's constant companion throughout his career. From the days when he was overlooked in high school to the days when he was trying to carry a team that couldn't quite keep up with his level of play, Michael had always known that greatness wasn't about just showing up on the court. It was about the preparation, the discipline, and the sacrifice that went into every game, every practice, every moment. Even with his championship, the pressure to maintain that level of success never truly went away. The 1992 season, with the Bulls aiming for their second consecutive championship, came with its own set of challenges. Michael's body was starting to feel the wear and tear of the grueling seasons, but he didn't show it. He pushed through, because that's what champions did. And then came the 1992 NBA Finals, a defining moment where the Bulls faced the Portland Trail Blazers. The series wasn't just another title run, it was about Michael proving that his success wasn't a fluke. He didn't want to be remembered as just a one-hit wonder. He wanted to establish his dominance. That final series became the stage for Michael to showcase what he was truly capable of. And he delivered. His incredible Game 1 performance, where he hit 6 three-pointers in the first half, became one of the most iconic games in NBA history. It was a statement that he wasn't just here to win titles, he was here to redefine the game. But it wasn't just about the championships. It was about his influence on the league, on his teammates, and on the culture of basketball. He became a global icon, a figurehead for the NBA. His success transcended basketball, and his legacy reached beyond the sport itself. He had taken the NBA from a niche interest to a worldwide phenomenon. And he wasn't done yet. The desire to keep pushing, to keep improving, was always there. The first retirement in 1993 shook the basketball world. Michael had reached the pinnacle, but the loss of his father left him in a place of uncertainty. His brief stint in baseball wasn't just a break from basketball, it was a search for something deeper. The fire that had driven him in basketball was dimming, and he needed to find a new purpose. Baseball didn't give him that, but it taught him a new perspective. It was only when he returned to basketball in 1995 that he realized how much he had missed the game. The fire was rekindled, and the second three-peat with the Bulls was the result of his relentless work ethic, his renewed focus, and his ever-evolving leadership. The photo in his hands wasn't just a memento of a great shot, it was a reminder of the journey that had brought him to that point. The doubts, the setbacks, the frustration, it had all been part of the process. And while his legacy would be defined by the championships and the accolades, Michael Jordan knew that it was the fight, the resilience, and the unwavering belief in himself that made him who he was. The journey was never about the destination. It was about embracing the struggle, learning from it, and never, ever giving up. And that was the story of Michael Jordan, the man, the player, the legend. Michael sat at his desk, the photo still resting in front of him, reflecting on his career, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. He thought about how much basketball had defined him, yet how much of it was just a part of his greater journey. Looking at the picture, he remembered the doubts he'd faced early on, the doubts that lingered even as he became a global icon. The years he spent fighting against the odds, struggling to meet expectations, those moments where he almost considered giving up. It was hard for anyone to imagine that someone as successful as Michael Jordan had ever questioned his place in the world, but it was those very moments that had made him who he was. The feeling of being doubted had never truly left him. Even after the first championship, the pressure to maintain that level of success was immense. The critics were always there, waiting for him to slip up, eager to say that his time was over. That feeling of needing to prove himself never truly disappeared. When people asked him what drove him, the answer was simple. It wasn't the accolades or the fame, it was the hunger, the need to prove that he could do it again and again, despite the naysayers. Looking back at the 1991 season, when the Bulls had finally broken through and claimed their first championship, it felt like a culmination of everything he had been working toward. But that victory had come with a deep realization. Success wasn't just about proving the critics wrong, it was about making his own peace with what he had accomplished. He had to reconcile with the fact that while his talent had carried him to the top, it was his mental toughness, his willpower, and his refusal to back down that truly made him the player he became. Yet, even after the first championship, the pressure never let up. He had done what so many said he couldn't, lead his team to a title. But the expectations for him didn't lessen, they only grew. He wasn't just expected to win one championship, but multiple. The challenge was no longer just about proving he could win. It was about proving that he could sustain excellence, year in and year out. And each time he achieved that, the standard for success seemed to grow higher. But that's what drove him. The constant pursuit of greatness. Every season, every practice, every game was another opportunity to prove to himself that he could keep going, that he could push beyond what he had already achieved. That same drive had pushed him to do the unthinkable, to go out and win 3 more championships in a row. To dominate a league that was filled with incredible talent, from Larry Bird to Magic Johnson to the up-and-coming players like Charles Barkley and Patrick Ewing. But the one constant throughout all those years was Michael. His work ethic, his commitment to the game, and his mentality were what set him apart. It wasn't just about playing basketball. It was about doing everything in his power to win, whatever it took. And that mentality became his signature, a part of who he was as a person as much as a player. Michael could still remember the early days of that second three-peat, when everything started clicking into place. The acquisition of key players like Ron Harper and Steve Kerr had bolstered the Bulls' depth, making them an even more formidable force. The addition of Phil Jackson as the head coach had provided the stability and strategy that complemented Michael's raw talent. The triangle offense, which had initially seemed like a complicated system, gave him the freedom to focus on his strengths while also integrating his teammates. The result was a Bulls team that was not only capable of winning but also of dominating. Still, despite the victories, there was always something lurking in the back of his mind, the feeling that he had to do more. In 1996, when the Bulls captured their 4th title, it wasn't just another win, it was a reaffirmation of everything Michael had worked for. But even then, as they held the trophy aloft, he wasn't content. He had already started thinking about what came next. The victories were sweet, but the real satisfaction came from the pursuit of excellence itself. That was where he found his peace. The photo on his desk was a reminder of that journey. It was a reminder of the sacrifice, the struggle, and the drive to become the best. That game-winning shot at UNC wasn't just a moment of glory, it was a moment that encapsulated everything Michael had experienced up until that point, his doubts, his fears, his belief that he could overcome whatever came his way. And it was the beginning of a journey that would take him to the top of the basketball world. But the journey wasn't easy. Even after his first championship in 1991, Michael still had to deal with the weight of expectations. He was no longer just trying to prove he could win, he was proving that he could maintain that level of excellence, that he could win year after year. Every season, the challenge grew. Every opponent became more formidable. But every season, Michael rose to meet it. His determination to keep pushing, to keep improving, became part of his identity. He was never satisfied, never content with what he had already achieved. The hunger to win, to prove that he was the best, kept him going. As Michael reflected on the years that followed, from the 1991 victory to the second three-peat, he realized that the biggest victories weren't just the championships. The biggest victories were the moments where he had faced adversity and come out on top. The injuries, the setbacks, the failures, they were all part of what made him the player he became. But it was the ability to overcome those challenges, to use them as fuel, that separated him from the rest. Every time he was knocked down, he got back up stronger. Every loss only made him more determined to win. The 1998 season, the last season with the Chicago Bulls, was a testament to everything Michael had learned. It was a season filled with tension, both on and off the court. The media was relentless, focusing on the end of an era. But Michael's focus remained the same. He wasn't playing for the media. He wasn't playing for the fans. He was playing for himself, for the love of the game, and for the desire to win one more title. The Last Dance, as it came to be known, wasn't just about that final championship, it was about everything that had led to that point, all the struggles, all the triumphs, and the legacy he was leaving behind. As he sat there, holding the photo in his hand, Michael thought about how far he had come, from the kid who was cut from his high school team to the man who had redefined the game of basketball. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every moment. The photo was more than just a reminder of the past. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for, everything he had become. The legacy of Michael Jordan wasn't just about the 6 championships, the MVPs, or the countless records. It was about the mindset that had carried him through it all, the belief that greatness wasn't something you achieved once and then coasted on. It was something you had to work for every day, something you had to earn over and over again. It was about pushing yourself, and others, to be better, to strive for more, and to never settle for anything less than your best. As Michael placed the photo back on his desk, he knew that his legacy would live on, not just in the records and the titles, but in the hearts of those who had watched him play. It wasn't just about being the greatest basketball player of all time, it was about being someone who never stopped chasing greatness. The journey would never truly end. The summer of 1997 had been a whirlwind for Michael Jordan. As the Chicago Bulls pushed toward another championship, it felt like the world was watching every move he made. The team was unstoppable, and Michael's performance was as close to perfection as anyone could imagine. But beneath the surface, there were moments of doubt and pressure that even he couldn't escape. At 34, Michael Jordan was no longer the young player he had been when he first entered the league. His body was showing signs of wear and tear, and the relentless schedule was taking its toll. Yet, despite the physical exhaustion and the constant media scrutiny, Michael remained focused. He had one goal in mind: to win. He had come so far, and with the possibility of another championship within his reach, he was determined not to let anything get in his way. The Bulls were at their peak, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. The road to the finals wasn't easy. Every opponent seemed to have their own strategy to stop Michael, and he had to find new ways to adapt and stay ahead of the competition. But the great ones, as Michael knew, always found a way. His leadership and relentless pursuit of excellence had turned the Bulls into a juggernaut, and every time they encountered adversity, Michael was there, pulling the team forward with his undeniable willpower. Yet, as dominant as the Bulls were, there was something Michael couldn't escape: the growing feeling that this might be the end of the road. The question of retirement had started to hover around him. He had already retired once before, and although he came back with a vengeance, the idea that the 1997 season might be his last had begun to weigh on him. The media constantly speculated about his future. Would he retire after this season? Would he keep playing, pushing himself even further? The tension wasn't just external. Michael had begun to question whether he could continue playing at the level required to win another championship. His body had been through so much over the years. The injuries, the long seasons, the pressure, it was all starting to add up. He had already achieved everything a player could want: 6 championships, 5 MVP awards, countless accolades. But something inside him kept him going. It wasn't the titles. It wasn't the praise. It was the need to prove that he was still the best, that he could still lead the Bulls to another victory. The finals against the Utah Jazz in 1997 would be one of the most iconic moments of Michael's career. The Jazz were a formidable team, led by Hall of Famers John Stockton and Karl Malone. The Bulls were the defending champions, but there was no guarantee that they would make it past the Jazz. The games were grueling, and every possession felt like it could be the difference between victory and defeat. But with the series tied 2-2, Game 5 would prove to be a turning point, not just for the Bulls, but for Michael's legacy. The night of Game 5, Michael was battling more than just the Jazz. He was fighting a severe case of food poisoning that left him weak and nauseous. He hadn't slept much, and his body was struggling to keep up with the demands of the game. But Michael Jordan was no stranger to adversity. He had played through pain before, and nothing would stop him now. The images from that night are still burned into the memories of anyone who watched. Michael, pale and visibly exhausted, dragged himself onto the court and played one of the most memorable games in NBA history. Despite his condition, he scored 38 points, leading the Bulls to a crucial victory. His performance in Game 5 became known as the flu game, and it would forever be a testament to his toughness, willpower, and determination. The final moments of Game 5 were a microcosm of everything Michael had come to represent. Even as he struggled to stay on his feet, he found a way to lead the Bulls to victory. His performance was more than just physical, it was mental. He had willed himself to do something most people would have considered impossible. That was the essence of Michael Jordan. Even when the odds were stacked against him, he found a way to rise to the occasion. But it wasn't just about the victory itself. It was about the way that performance embodied everything Michael had fought for over the course of his career. It wasn't just about being the best player on the court. It was about proving that no matter the obstacle, he could overcome it. It was about showing his teammates that no matter how difficult the situation, they could still find a way to win. That was the leadership Michael had become known for. And in Game 5, when the stakes were higher than ever, he delivered. The next day, as Michael recovered from the exhaustion of that game, he found himself reflecting on his journey. He had given everything to the game, and yet, it felt like he was constantly being asked for more. The pressure to be perfect, to maintain that standard of greatness, never relented. But there was also a sense of peace in knowing that he had done it all. He had reached the pinnacle of the sport. Now, as he looked at the final series and the looming possibility of another championship, Michael couldn't help but think that this might be his last dance. In the following games, the Bulls would eventually defeat the Jazz to win the 1997 NBA championship. Michael had done it again. But this title wasn't just another victory in the long list of championships he had won, it was a reminder of everything he had accomplished. The title was a culmination of years of hard work, determination, and sacrifice. It was a moment that underscored his place in the history of the game. Yet, even as he stood on the podium holding the championship trophy, Michael knew that there was something even greater than this moment. It was the legacy he had built, the way he had reshaped the game, the way he had inspired generations of players to come. Michael Jordan wasn't just a basketball player, he was a symbol of what could be accomplished through dedication, mental toughness, and an unrelenting drive to be the best. And as he looked out at the crowd, feeling the weight of the cheers and applause, Michael understood that this championship, this victory, was more than just a trophy. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for, everything he had given to the game, and everything he had overcome. The legacy of Michael Jordan was not just about the wins or the accolades, it was about the example he set, the standard he created, and the inspiration he provided to everyone who dared to dream. In that moment, as the confetti fell and the crowd roared, Michael Jordan knew that he had done it all. He had pushed through every obstacle, risen above every doubt, and proved that greatness wasn't just something you achieved once, it was something you earned every single day. The 1997 championship had solidified Michael Jordan's place in basketball history, but as he sat in the locker room, his mind began to wander. The feeling of winning was something he had experienced time and again, but this moment felt different. He wasn't sure why, but the constant buzz of media, teammates, and the city celebrating outside his locker room seemed distant. He knew how much the fans and the world valued the championships, but what about him? Was it just another step, or was this truly the final stamp on his career? Michael had always known how fleeting the joy of winning could be. The moment the confetti stopped falling and the celebrations died down, the game would call again. It would demand more. His body had taken a toll, and at 35, Michael knew he was closer to the end of his journey than the beginning. As much as he loved the game, as much as it had defined him for decades, he was starting to sense that the time was nearing to step away. But that thought, no matter how many times it crept in, was always pushed aside by the drive to win. Even after the victories, after the awards and recognition, he couldn't shake the idea that there was more he still had to prove. The season had been grueling, no question, but it was also invigorating. The Bulls had faced tremendous adversity, injuries had tested their resolve, and the competition had only gotten fiercer. But Michael had led them through it all. And yet, there was a gnawing feeling inside him, something that had lingered since his return to the game in 1995 after his brief retirement. Was he still the best? Was he still the guy who could carry the weight of a team and push them to greatness? He had already come out of retirement once, driven by the desire to prove to himself and the world that he still had what it took to compete. He had proven it time and time again, with every victory, every clutch shot, every moment in the spotlight. But now, as he sat on the edge of the locker room bench, looking at the trophy beside him, he couldn't help but think about his future. The world saw him as an immortal. Yet, Michael Jordan knew better than anyone that immortality in sports was an illusion. He had seen players come and go, legends fade, and the game evolve. He had built his legacy, but the challenge was always there, pushing him forward, forcing him to do it again. The phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. A few minutes later, he he found himself walking to the press conference room. There was a part of him that hated the media frenzy. The questions would be the same: what's next? Is this the end? But he had always been good at answering those questions. His charm, his confidence, and his sharp wit had served him well over the years. He knew how to handle the spotlight. But as he walked to the podium, a sense of uncertainty crept in. Was it really over? Or was he just getting started? The room was filled with flashes from cameras, voices shouting questions, and the usual parade of reporters eager to get a quote. The script was predictable. Michael, how does it feel to win your 5th championship? What's next for you? Do you see yourself coming back for another season? Michael smiled, as he always did, and began his usual routine of deflecting the questions. He answered with ease, praising his teammates, acknowledging the hard work of the coaching staff, and emphasizing how the game was a team effort. The fans, the city, the Bulls organization, they all deserved their praise. But the real message he was sending to the reporters wasn't about his team. It was about him. Every year, every season, the questions got harder. Michael had already climbed the mountain several times. The challenge now was whether he could keep going, even when there was little left to prove. But he wasn't in a rush to answer those questions. He wasn't ready to give them the final answer. Not yet. His journey had always been about proving people wrong. That was where his drive came from, his ability to push through doubts and criticism, to exceed expectations when it seemed impossible. Even as the Bulls dominated in the late 90s, Michael had always carried a chip on his shoulder. Every loss was a lesson, every critic was fuel. The drive to be the best had always pushed him past his limits. But now, after so many years, after so many victories, he had to ask himself if there was anything left to prove. The championship wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about maintaining a legacy, about keeping his place as the best, despite the passage of time and the rise of new stars in the league. He had watched young players like Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan rise to prominence, knowing that their time would come. But for now, the spotlight was still his. That's why this championship felt different. It wasn't just another title. It was a statement that, despite everything, Michael Jordan was still at the top of his game. He had led the Bulls to another championship, and he had done it while facing his own mortality as a player. As the press conference wound down, Michael stepped away from the podium. He could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Retirement loomed in the distance, but the lure of competition, the thrill of playing, was still strong. He wasn't ready to say goodbye to the game he loved, to the stage that had defined his life. When he entered the locker room, the usual post-game celebration was in full swing. His teammates were shouting, laughing, and reveling in the moment. They had earned this victory, and for many of them, this was the pinnacle of their careers. But for Michael, it was different. He had seen it all. The championship trophies, the MVP awards, the endorsements, the commercials, he had experienced everything the game had to offer. He had done it all. And yet, here he was again, still the leader, still the focal point of the Bulls' success. He looked around the room, his gaze falling on the younger players. They were hungry. They were eager. They wanted their own place in history. But Michael had already carved out his legacy. He had already cemented his place as one of the greatest players of all time. And yet, the question still lingered, did he have enough left in the tank to go for another title? The room fell silent as his teammates gathered around him, the excitement of the win settling into a more reflective mood. Michael stood in the middle of it all, feeling the weight of his journey. He had been the best for so long, but how much longer could he keep it up? How much longer could he continue to lead his team to the highest level of success? It wasn't just about being the best anymore. It was about something deeper. Michael's drive had always been about proving that he could do it, again, and again, and again. But after this championship, after all the years of dominance, it was becoming clear that the question was no longer about proving anything to others. It was about proving something to himself. That night, as he lay in bed, Michael's mind raced. The decision wasn't easy. He had built his career on the constant pursuit of excellence, but now he was faced with the hardest choice he had ever made. Should he walk away? Should he give the game one more year, one more chance to add another title to his name? The years had been kind to him, but the end was inevitable. He could feel it in his bones. The fire still burned, but the body wasn't the same. His love for the game hadn't changed, but his perspective had. This championship had felt like a final stamp on his career. The legacy was secure. The question now was whether to continue for the sake of pride, or to walk away, knowing he had given everything he had. For Michael Jordan, the decision wasn't about how many titles he could win. It was about whether the drive to be the best was still there. And as he closed his eyes, he knew the answer wouldn't come easily. But when it did, it would be the right one. The game had shaped him, but it was time for him to decide whether it was still shaping his future. Michael woke up the morning after the celebration with a heavy heart. The trophy from the latest championship sat on his kitchen counter, glinting in the soft light of the morning sun. It was a familiar sight, one that had come to represent his success, his dominance in the game. But this time, it didn't feel as rewarding as it once had. He had worked his whole life to win championships, and here he was again, standing with yet another trophy, yet he felt a sense of uncertainty. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, his eyes flickered to the window, where the view of the city of Chicago stretched out before him. For years, this city had been his home, his stage, where he had become a legend. It had witnessed his rise from a talented young player to the undisputed greatest of all time. He had given everything for this city, for this game. But now, the question was whether it was time to give it up. It wasn't the first time he had thought about retirement, but it felt different this time. Michael's body had started to show signs of the years of battle. The knee surgeries, the hours spent working through pain, the constant toll on his joints, he had learned to ignore those aches and push through the exhaustion. But after the latest championship, the physical strain was starting to wear on him in a way it hadn't before. He had already reached the pinnacle of the game. He had won, time and time again. So what more was there to achieve? The drive was still there, of course. It was the same drive that had propelled him through every obstacle, every challenge, and every rival. He wasn't just playing for the championships, the accolades, or even the money. He was playing for the love of the game. But somewhere deep down, Michael wondered if it was time to pass the torch. Could he continue to play at the highest level? Could he keep up with the younger players, those who didn't know what it meant to carry the weight of a dynasty on their shoulders? The decision wasn't as simple as it seemed. His love for basketball had always been a defining characteristic of who he was. He had often said that the day he no longer felt the same passion for the game was the day he would walk away. But how did you know when that day had come? How could he walk away from the game that had shaped him, the game that had given him everything? Michael had never been one to shy away from hard decisions. When he retired in 1993, after the tragic death of his father, it had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. He had given everything to basketball, and to step away, even temporarily, had felt like an unthinkable decision. But the moment had been right. It had been the right choice for him at that time. Now, the choice wasn't as clear. There was no tragic event to push him out of the game. There was just a man who had done it all and wondered if there was still more to achieve. Over the next few weeks, the question of retirement continued to linger in his mind. Every conversation with his teammates, every practice session, every game felt different. He was still the leader of the Bulls, still the most dominant force on the court, but there were times when he could feel the weight of it all. The expectations, the relentless pursuit of perfection, it was wearing him down in ways he couldn't ignore. As he sat in his office, looking at the championship trophy one last time, Michael thought about everything he had accomplished. He had been a part of 6 NBA championships with the Chicago Bulls. He had revolutionized the game, become a global icon, and changed the way basketball was played. But now, as he looked at the reflection of himself in the trophy, it seemed like there was nothing more to prove. He had given everything to basketball. What more was left? Michael's thoughts wandered back to his teammates, his brothers on the court. They were the ones who had helped him reach this point, the ones who had fought alongside him for each championship. Scottie Pippen, who had become more than just a co-star, he had become Michael's right-hand man, the one who had always been there when it mattered most. Ron Harper, Steve Kerr, Luke Longley, the players who had contributed in ways that were just as important, even if their roles weren't as celebrated as his own. Michael knew that without them, the titles wouldn't have come. The team effort was what made the championships possible, not just individual greatness. And that was part of what made the decision so hard. He didn't want to let go of the camaraderie, the drive, the shared moments of victory. The locker room, the practices, the bus rides, it was all part of the journey. But even more than that, Michael didn't want to let go of the pursuit of greatness. It was what had defined his career, what had kept him going when everything else seemed impossible. He had always known that there was no such thing as being good enough. There was always something more to achieve, always something more to prove. But now, after everything, he wondered if it was time to stop chasing that elusive greatness. The phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a call from Jerry Krause, the Bulls' general manager. Michael didn't need to pick up the phone to know what the conversation would be about. Krause was likely already thinking about next season, already considering the next steps for the team. The idea of keeping the Bulls' championship window open for another year was something Krause had hinted at. Michael had no doubt that the franchise would be happy to have him back, but was he ready to come back? Could he bring himself to put in another season of the kind of effort that had earned him the previous 6 championships? The decision wasn't just about basketball anymore. It wasn't just about playing for another title. It was about his personal life, his future. He had other ventures to explore, his basketball camp, his brand, his involvement with the Charlotte Hornets. There were opportunities off the court that had started to call to him. Michael Jordan was more than just a basketball player now. He was an entrepreneur, a businessman, an icon in every sense of the word. But what did that mean for his future in basketball? The truth was, Michael wasn't sure. His passion for the game had never wavered, but the question of whether he could keep playing at the highest level was starting to weigh on him. Every shot, every pass, every dribble came with a cost, both physically and mentally. He couldn't keep playing forever. The question was whether he could walk away while still at the top, while still on his terms. As the day went on, the weight of the decision grew heavier. He wasn't sure if he would ever be able to fully let go of the game. After all, basketball had been his life for as long as he could remember. But the legacy he had built, the history he had created, was something he could hold on to forever. The decision was no longer just about his career. It was about what kind of man he wanted to be moving forward. He had done everything he set out to do, and now it was time to decide what came next. In the quiet of his home, Michael sat back in his chair and thought about the legacy he had already cemented. It wasn't about the championships, the accolades, or the records. It was about the journey, the lessons learned along the way, and the impact he had on the game. No matter what happened next, Michael Jordan would always be remembered as the greatest basketball player of all time. And that, in itself, was enough. The decision came quietly. There was no press conference, no dramatic announcement, no emotional farewell to a packed arena. Michael Jordan knew that when the time came to leave the game, it would be on his terms. It had always been that way for him. And so, with a final glance at the championship trophy, the one from the 1997 season, he knew what needed to be done. The time had come to walk away from the game that had defined his life for more than 2 decades. He was at peace with the decision, though it wasn't easy. It never was. Michael Jordan wasn't someone who ran from challenges, and the decision to retire, again, was just as difficult as the first time. But in this case, it wasn't driven by a moment of tragedy or a loss as profound as the death of his father. This time, it was about choosing the right moment, about leaving when he still had something left to give, but choosing not to burn out. He wanted to leave behind a legacy, not a shadow of his former self, struggling to maintain relevance in a game that had evolved without him. It was fitting that the decision came after such a hard-fought season. It wasn't just about the 6th championship, though that was certainly part of it. It was about how he had led the Bulls through injuries, personal challenges, and the unrelenting pressure to be great. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and doubt that had lingered in the background, Michael had carried his team to the top once again. But more importantly, he had proved something to himself. He had nothing left to prove to anyone else. There was a calm in his decision. He had reached the summit so many times, and each time, the climb had been more grueling. The years had taken their toll. The flashes of brilliance were still there, but the wear and tear of a career that had spanned almost 15 years was undeniable. Michael wasn't the same player he had been in his prime. But there was still a desire to compete, to win. The question was whether he could keep pushing himself to that limit, and he realized that it was time to let go. He sat down with his family in the living room one evening, his wife and children around him. They had supported him through everything, the highs and lows, the travel, the time away, the constant scrutiny. They had been there when his first retirement came, when he stepped away from the game to try his hand at baseball. They had been with him through his return, through the second three-peat, through everything. And now, they would be with him again as he made this decision. "I think it's time," Michael said softly, looking around at their faces. There were no tears, no dramatic reactions. His family understood. They had seen it in him long before he had. The decision wasn't sudden, but it was still monumental. It wasn't just about basketball, it was about him finding peace, finding the next step in his life. "I'm proud of you, Michael," his wife, Juanita, said with a smile, her voice filled with love. "You've given everything to the game. And now it's time for you to enjoy the next chapter." Michael nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He had done everything he had set out to do. 6 championships. 5 MVPs, countless memories, moments, and achievements that would live on in the hearts of basketball fans for generations. But it wasn't about the numbers or the records. It was about the impact he had made, the way he had changed the game, and the way he had influenced the generations that had come after him. He had inspired young players to believe that they could be great, too. He had changed the way basketball was played, the way athletes were viewed. Michael Jordan wasn't just a player, he was a cultural icon. A few days later, Michael announced his retirement to the media. There was no dramatic speech, no tear-filled farewell. He simply stated the truth: it was time to step away. The message was clear: Michael Jordan had done it all, and now he was choosing to leave the game at the top. The media frenzy that followed was expected. The questions poured in: would he ever come back? Was there still a chance for him to play one more season? But Michael was resolute. He had made up his mind. The game would go on without him, and he was okay with that. Basketball would always be a part of who he was, but it was no longer the only part of him. He had other things to explore, other avenues to pursue. The outpouring of respect and admiration from around the basketball world was overwhelming. Former players, coaches, and fans all echoed the same sentiment: Michael Jordan had redefined the game, and the world of basketball would never be the same without him. But Michael didn't want to linger in the past. He wanted to be remembered for what he had done, not for what he could have done. He didn't need another comeback, he needed to let the legacy speak for itself. As the months passed, Michael found himself in a new rhythm. He spent time with his family, enjoying the things he hadn't been able to enjoy while his life had been consumed by basketball. He got involved in the business world, taking on new projects and helping to shape the future of the sport through his involvement with the Charlotte Hornets, the team he had become part owner of. His impact on the game was no longer measured by points scored or championships won, but by the way he had helped shape the future of basketball. He had accomplished everything he set out to do, and while there were moments of nostalgia, Michael didn't miss the grind of the game. He didn't miss the pressure, the injuries, or the constant expectation to be perfect. He had given all of himself to basketball, and now he could give more to his family, his businesses, and the other ventures he had always dreamed of. The world had moved on without him, and he had moved on with it. Michael Jordan would forever be remembered as the greatest player to ever step on the court, but for him, the greatest achievement was the peace he found after the game. He had conquered it all, and now he was free to write the next chapter of his life on his terms. In the end, Michael's legacy wasn't just about the 6 championships or the accolades. It was about how he transformed the game, how he made people believe in the impossible, and how he inspired generations to come. His name would forever be synonymous with greatness, but Michael Jordan knew that his true victory was in knowing he had given everything and left it all on the court. And as the years passed, that legacy would continue to inspire, long after the final buzzer had sounded.